Fitzcarraldo is a long-acclaimed feature film released in 1982 and directed by Werner Herzog, starring lead actor Klaus Kinski and a picturesque set of secondary characters as they reinterpret the real story of the Irish-Peruvian explorer Carlos Fermín Fitzcarraldo and his exploits in the Amazon riverbank. Without a doubt, Herzog chose a topic of much depth and a profound link to the beating heart of world history. The source material itself proves it to be, as testimonied in the solemn departure speech Carlos Fermín gave. Men of Europe, America and Asia, we have joined under the Peruvian flag not to embark on just another adventure, but to offer humanity the gift of prosperous lands, where the world's dispossessed can find a new home. Thus, it is no surprise that this masterpiece of a film happens to be, piece by piece and secret by secret, part of the plan of a greater model for Earth. One which lies at the core of the writings of another great German thinker, the philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Follow us as we explore this connection, deep as can be, beginning with the very fact of its conception. For you see, Herzog insisted in, through thick and through thin, have the story's itinerary, which involved crossing the Amazon, braving the rapids, and even passing a massive cruiser through the middle of a lush jungle mountain, be done entirely through physical reenactment, from start to finish, with no regard to the great casualties, injuries, damage to the land and expenses. This absolute madness, this obsession of Herzog's, can be better studied through his shooting diary, fittingly named Conquest of the Useless. In it, we can see that the filmmaker and his loyal crew were not just chasing realism. No, they just understood conscience in just the same way Hegel did. To this philosopher, a person's thought could never happen in a truly abstract, universal way. In reality, all thought happened under the conditions provided to it by key introspective experiences, be them personally lived or inherited through culture and history, that break the pre-established limits of conscience and allow new perspectives to fit into the larger system. Instead of concepts, Hegel spoke of Begriffen, or notions, that were able to change properties without abandoning their essence, partaking in this dynamic. The Begriff would come to influence one of the most important concepts in German social sciences, that of Verstehen, an intrahistoric understanding of an event that can only be acquired if one works hard to strip himself of his context and start thinking just like the subjects who lived the event firsthand. Anyways, let's boot up the movie. In the beginning, we see our protagonist, Brian Sweeney Fitzgerald, arrive at an opera house somewhere in colonial South America. He wishes to enter for, you see, he's obsessed with opera.
I want the opera house. I want my opera house! I want the opera house! This church remains closed till this town has its opera house!
But he carries no entrance, and cannot avoid confronting the opera house gate master. He happens to be a black man, one of little patience with all those strangers whom, like Brian, belong to the white social elite, whose hand he must get fed from reluctantly. But you see, Brian carries within him no such links of slavery and exploitation, and figures out a plan to enjoy the show anyways. He resolves to treat the black man as his equal, and persuades him to enter to the opera besides him, as all are born with the right to approach the sublime. In this radical act, the two men achieve together the smaller of the goals of Hegelian philosophy, Aufheben, which translates to overcoming. To Hegel, the world is shaped by a myriad of conflicts between ideas that impede the development of humanity's true collective will. It is the duty of the individual to resolve these impasses that await him without giving up to neither nihilism, skepticism, nor dogmatism, all in the hopes to find notions that carry out the powerful role of mediation and achieve resolution. The Hegelian method to seek these composite truths is called immanent critique, and it unfolds in three stages. First, a notion is affirmed as abstract. Then, it is negated and shown as incomplete by temporarily adopting the outlook of the opposite notion. And at last, what remains true in both worlds is reconciled to bring forth a new notion of better quality, called a concrete notion. Such a model stems from that of a previous German philosopher, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, who spoke in a somewhat analogous way of thesis and thesis and synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In Fiskaraldo, what we have just witnessed is one of the most important instances of immanent critique in history, that of what Hegel calls the master-slave dialectic. As an outside observer of the Haitian Revolution, which mobilized the Enlightenment ideas produced in Europe to fight against the very Frenchmen who devised them to pursue the abolition of slavery, Hegel was politicized into a faith in the exploited's ability to upturn the exploiter's reality. In the master-slave dialectic, the slave owner's idleness gives the slave the exclusive experience of exercising his capacities to shape the world at his will. Understanding his power in all its abstract force, he realizes that the slave owner's comfort hangs at the fine thread of his will to obey, and thus he negates the false peace and order of slavery by revolting. After the struggle is brought to exhaustion, the enlightened understanding of both life as leisure and life as labor come together, and what were previously a slave and its owners can now stand together as equals, obtaining the concrete right of equality before the law, which benefits both of them greatly. Well, it might shock you to realize this, but the movie's whole plot is one of these dialectics. Put a pin on this, and think about it as we go along. In short, Fitzgerald's goal in the Americas is to bring the opera to the remote port town of Iquitos, to have the great arias send waves through the jungle foliage and make ripples in the Amazon River basin. Lacking the funds to build an opera house, he resolves to build a steamboat and somehow get it into the isolated Ucayali River, to build a plantation on untapped land and ferry its productions across a small land tract into the more navigable Pachitea River. It goes without saying that this is a colonial project. In fact, the pretext, classical music, is itself a great marker of the climate of white supremacy present in Fitzgerald's world, which the German thinkers in the time of Hegel held as an absolute. As Professor Philip Ewell has stated, classical music operates on a wide racial frame, due to, among others, the alternationalist music pedagogue Heinrich Schenker. This means two things. Firstly, that outdated techniques, such as figure bass, are still canonized as the mass learns, at the behest of more important techniques from modern music that originate in racialized and countercultural music, like blues or rock. And secondly, that in global music discourse, 18th century classical notation is considered the most complex, overshadowing other music theories like those of India and the Islamic world. Furthermore, classical music is used at the hymns of many European countries and of the European Union itself. That is to say, it is inseparable from Eurocentrism. The Eurocentric perspective of Hegel lies, in essence, in a belief of Kantian origin in Europe's cultural monopoly over the possibility of a peaceful, enlightened and tolerant society, which it must spread, a society called the perpetual peace. To be more precise, what fascinates Fitzgerald the most about this deeply colonial subculture is the work of the opera singer Enrico Caruso. And well, this Italian superstar just happens to be the archetype of the utopian society which Hegel believes to await humanity at the end of history. He was the first opera singer to be heard globally, and one of the first worldwide celebrities. Respected in every city and country, except perhaps his own hometown of Milan, he is a man befitting of Hegel's dream of a global state, a federation led by a constitutional monarchy that ruled the whole world as a single sovereignty. In addition, he was one of the most important contributions, both in fame and funding, to the popularization of sound recording technologies, like the phonograph. So in a way, he is among the first Italian futurists, and prefigures the ideal state of man in the Hegelian utopia, where the whole of technology is put to the service of clothing and personal aesthetics. As an unrelated note, Caruso's inclusion in the narrative might also be Herzog's way of parodying, within the historical context, the mass consumer culture whose current he so often swims against. As we were saying, this whole project, this intromission of Caruso into the wild, is another Hegelian Aufhebung. In fact, it is the most important one, the process that is happening in Hegel's time, and shall lead to the end of history and the acquisition of utopia. It is the struggle between the two human natures. The first nature includes our emotions, our link to the biosphere, our instincts, our intuitions, and our primitive social knowledge. The second nature is the one built throughout millennia of history, as a deposit of reason and ethics, contained in civilization and its legal codes. At the heart of the second nature lies man's ability to deny all preconditions other than his relationship with God, his free will when aided by the power of reason. In Fitzgerald's triumph over the elements, as Caruso is played on the steamboat over the rage of the Amazon, our protagonist acts as what Hegel would call a vessel of the world spirit, or Weltgeist in German, by bringing forth the concrete who mediates between the natures. The romantic conception of pure art, that is to say, the art for art's sake, that is Fitzcarraldo in itself. However, he does not achieve this feat alone, but by displaying the force of his mission to the natives, who join him when his crew abandons him. This is a great illustration of Hegel's theory of cultural exchange. To him, the Weltgeist is like an almost mute melody that all cultures hear and understand if they put in the effort. But some cultures happen to have better access to it in certain times, as they happen to have a better people's spirit, or Volkgeist. The nations with the Volkgeist the times call for take up the mantle of cultural leadership, and spread their ideas to all who are willing to hear, so that others may take up their role in future dialectics. Together, the chorus of the different Volkgeisten form the Zeitgeist, or spirit of the age, a measure of humanity's common progress. Not all are disciplined by the heroic mission Fitzgerald embarks on. We have to point out, among many, the disruptive activities of the cook Werekeke, who symbolizes the decolonial subject that does not participate or owe respect to Western grand narratives, like that of the Hegelian dialectic. In fact, he is but a sign of the exact place where Herzog diverges from Hegel. For the filmmaker, the perfect mediation is not possible, and shall always remain incomplete, because the madness within man and his supposedly rational systems skews the equilibrium towards the first nature, keeping us with the feet in the earth, far from the transcendence of heaven and utopia. To represent this madness, Herzog chose to recast Klaus Kinski, who in the past has served him to represent a paranoid conquistador, made into a maniac by the Song of the Jungle in the film Aguirre, The Wrath of God, way back in 1972. So utopia cannot be achieved. Heaven cannot be brought to earth outside of one's own peace of mind. And as such, Fitzgerald is doomed to fail, betrayed by the natives in the frenzy of a feast that reconnects them with the first nature. But is all hope lost? In Hegelian aesthetics, tragedy is a deterministic happening, to be found when divinity and history overtake the will of men to drive them into heroic positions where, without a chance to step back, one must choose between two goods of equal value, so that no determination can be truly righteous. In Caruso's work, we can find this in the first opera where he gathered a great audience, called L'Arlesina. In the play's script, we see the protagonist, Federico, have to choose between Vivetta stable woman who loves him, and Laurlesina, whom he loves but who is reckless, and instead of loving him back, keeps betraying him for his money and status, while she cheats on him with another man, Metifio, whose name reminds us of the devil Mephistopheles. That is to say, Caruso's character is forced to choose between the triumph of the second nature, a reasonable but passionless engagement, and the triumph of the first nature, a romantic love that madness persuades him into obsessing over. This is just the thing that happens to Fitzgerald when he finds himself riding the steamship toward the rapids, where its destruction is certain. Was his hand not intertwined with a fatalistic destiny, he could have chosen to join the natives, and perhaps rescue the ship or build a new one, now that they have reached the Ucayali. But alas, he had to commit to the choiceless choice, the tragedy, the ship. In a symbolic sense, this ending points us outside of the Hegelian text, and inside the analysis of his work brought by Marx and Engels, who back then were part of a circle known as the Young Hegelians. To them both, Hegel's whole philosophy rests on the farce of hiding attention, that which lies between the material base and the superstructure, which is the sum of ideas and mystical experiences that bundle together to form the ideology and institutions of a system that the ruling classes have established as legitimate. The superstructure is believed to be an epiphenomenon of the material conditions, just like the foam that flows betwixt the crashing waves, or like a ship, a fatuous being, that floats over the hard matter of the earth, the source of life, a river. But in Hegelian philosophy, the opposite connection is made. The superstructure, the power of ideas, is understood as superior to matter thanks to the will of the heroic subject, which transcends individuality in its connection to history and the collective struggles of its Volkgeist. As such, the boat survives thanks to occasionalism, the mystical intervention of what can only be God, and in the end, Fitzgerald's bravery is rewarded when the opera passes by the city, and classical music finally harmonizes over Iquitos. From beginning to end, we have faced the element that unites the world of Fitzcarraldo together, the place in the air where off-heaven, classical music, tragedy, and the theater of history become one, the opera. That is all for today's video. We hope you have enjoyed. If so, please leave a like, maybe a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell if you would like to see more of us in the future. I am David, and this has been a futile conquest.